saturated by other digital cameras from other companies. And all of these digital camera sales put a real damper on Kodak's main money-making product, camera film. Yes. You see, Kodak had everything they needed to be successful and prevent the drastic downfall they've experienced over the last 20 years or so, but they were too afraid of change. Kodak had the technology, but they lacked the imagination. They didn't want things to change. They just assumed that they could continue on with business as usual. But this type of rigid thinking doesn't just happen to companies like Kodak. It happens to you and me as well. We all can get so caught up in the way things are or the way things used to be that we fail to imagine, we fail to believe all that's possible with God. In the scriptures, it's often the disciples who play the role of the people who just don't seem to understand what Jesus is really capable of doing. They're so caught up in the way that things are that they just want everything to stay the same. And as a result, the disciples are often the ones who completely fall behind in understanding what Jesus is up to and what Jesus is capable of. I want to read for you now a portion of this gospel passage that's printed in your bulletin. You can follow along with it, but keep it handy because we're going to be reading it just a little bit at a time. We begin Mark chapter 9, verse 2. 6 days later. Okay, stop there. 6 days later. Whenever the gospel writers include specific details like these, you can be sure that they're trying to tell us something. In this case, the reference to the number 6 is meant to indicate a lack of resolution. God created the world in 7 days, and so in the Bible, whenever the number 7 appears, you know that that's a sign of completion. But if the number 6 is mentioned, that's a clue that something is not quite finished yet. So Mark, the gospel writer of this passage, is giving us a hint. He's telling us to read the details of this story, knowing that what we are about to read is not, in fact, the full story. Okay, let's look back at our reading. As I read this next section, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of Peter and James or John and just imagine what this moment must have been like for them. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. And his clothes became dazzling white, like no such thing on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Okay, so imagine that you or Peter or James or John, you've been invited into the inner circle with Jesus, and then this miraculous moment on top of a mountain is happening where Jesus is shining and blinking like a neon sign, and suddenly Moses and Elijah are there, and these are the folk heroes that you've heard so much about in your youth, all of their countless stories, and they're there chatting with neon sign Jesus. If that happened to you, how would you feel? Maybe you'd wonder, was it something I ate? Or maybe you'd call it a mountaintop moment in your walk of faith. I think that's what I would refer to this as. I'm guessing you've heard that phrase before, mountaintop moments. These are these times when the miraculous seems to happen right before our eyes, and we're left feeling so close to God in that space. These moments can be such a gift to our life of faith in the ways that they strengthen our spirit and our belief, but oftentimes, these mountaintop moments can become our sole focus. When we find ourselves in mountaintop moments, it can be easy to think that this is all that matters, that this is the whole story. Let's look back, though, at our reading, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Peter says to Jesus, "Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He said this because he did not know what to say, because they were so frightened. So Peter experiences a mountaintop moment, and now he wants to build a mountain home. He wants to remain on the mountain and in that mountaintop moment forever. But remember, this is the transfiguration event that happened on the 6th day. That is to say, this moment and other mountaintop moments that we experience are not, in fact, the full story. The problem with Peter and the problem with you and me is that sometimes we lack imagination. We lack the ability to catch a vision for a future that's even better than this current moment. We can become so stuck in the present moment, or even worse, so stuck in the past, that we have no imagination for what God could do in the future. It seems that kids are often the ones who can pull us back and help us to see the world with wonder and possibility and imagination again. I remember there was a young girl at one of the previous churches where I served, and she came up to me one Sunday because she was very worried about her cat, Milo. She was sad and fearful that her lifelong pet was going to die, and she told me about all of this. The next week, however, when I saw her again, she was overjoyed. She ran up to me and told me, "Guess what? Milo is going to be a tree." I didn't know what to make of this statement until I talked to her mother, who explained to me that Milo had died during the last week, and they had buried him in their backyard along with a seedling. And they had told their daughter that Milo was not hurting anymore and that he would help nourish this tree so it could grow. And the young girl heard all of this and believed in something even better, that Milo was going to become the tree. The scriptures encourage us to have faith like a child, faith like this, because children still have imaginations that are open enough to believe in the beautiful and the impossible, and the truth is that the promises of God are always so much bigger, so much more stunning than we initially expect. Let's look at that gospel reading and how it ends. Then a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from the cloud, "This is my son whom I love, listen to him." And suddenly when the disciples looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. The Transfiguration probably seemed like a moment where things couldn't get any better, but even in that moment, God tells the disciples to listen to Jesus because God knows that there's more to come in this story. This moment on the mountaintop is only the midpoint of Jesus' story. Jesus didn't just come to earth to sparkle and chat with Moses and Elijah. No, after this, he journeyed down the mountain. And he didn't even want the disciples talking about what happened up there because his mission was to travel down the mountain and to the cross and to give his life and to rise again, so that we all might believe in a future that's even better. There's so much in this world that picks away at our faith. The pain and the sorrow and the suffering in our lives, the cold, hard logic of all the systems in our world, all of this can lead us to believe that life is nothing more than a random lottery of meaningless tragedy. But our faith invites us to have a little imagination, to believe in something more beautiful than all that. We're invited to believe that it's only the sixth day. So the way it's always been is not the way it always has to be. We're invited to believe that the injustice of this world is not the end, that our grief is not the end, that death itself is not the end. I believe that to be a person of faith means that you're a person who's willing to dream big. And here this morning, as we raise money for world hunger, I hope you're having your imagination expanded a little bit as we discover what's possible. I'll admit, each year when this Sunday rolls around, I wonder if our Super Bowl of caring efforts will flop this time. And each year I'm reminded that sometimes I can lack imagination. I don't believe strongly enough in all that's possible with God. I don't believe strongly enough in all that God can accomplish through us. But I pray that here at Bethany, we won't ever see our efforts as completed. It's still only the sixth day, and God isn't finished yet. I pray that this church will be a place where we believe in the promises of God with abandon, And in so doing, we discover just how transformational faith in Christ can truly be for us and for our world. And so maybe one of the best ways that we can go about cultivating this type of imaginative and transformational faith that I'm talking about, maybe one of the best ways is to try and have faith like a child again. And so to conclude my sermon, I'd like to invite up the children for your children's sermon. Please come up, everyone. Deacon Deborah is going to take us home, if you will. But let's vision together about how incredible God really is. Please come forward for the children's sermon, friends.
Good morning. Good morning. Come on up close. Come on up close. You need to see what I have. Come on up close. Oh, it's so good to see all of you. I love it. Good to see you. Oh my heavens, this is great. Okay, so today we're celebrating Super Bowl of Caring. So I don't know if you were in the fellowship hall. Smell soup? Did you smell soup? A lot of people made soup and brought it in. So after church today, you can go get some soup. I knew this, so I brought a container to put my soup in. But I'm curious, when you look at my soup container, what else could it